Hey, Andy.
Hey, Jed, how are you?
Good. It's been a little while.
It is. And I thought we were doing Christmas and holiday and the season and all of that today.
Come on. I got at least got an elf on a shelf, or I got a charter folk on a shelf back here, and I got my grandparent. I mean,
It's a
I
chart.
wear,
It's a charter elf.
yeah, my sweater was so ugly last year, that I remember that neon green thing I had.
I
So,
liked it.
well, you were the only one.
I guess. Probably. How can you tell a charter school elf from a regular elf?
Um, Good
I
question.
think. I think it's it's like vegans and libertarians. They'll tell you.
I think it's an accountable elf. It's an innovative elf.
I don't
So,
know. I don't know. Okay, it's good to see you. We got a lot to cover. We should do like a little bit year in review, year look forward, and some stuff to talk about. There's been a lot going on since we last saw
yeah,
each other.
yeah, I like the tough to talk about stuff, but I am curious just what you're thinking about. Um, what does 25 sum up to be for you? And as you're, and maybe after that, what are you thinking about for 26?
Man, 25. You wonder how many mulligans does a country get, right? And like we've got like big problems and some opportunities to maybe try to reset them, and yet we seem to blow every one, right? Like the country sent a clear message in 2016, 2017 when they elected Trump, and like neither party seems to have actually heeded what that message was. And here again, here we are, and I'm struck by like let's talk about the Department of Education. Government, we do need some restructuring, right? Like there's parts of government that have not been modernized for a while. There's compelling arguments we've talked about on this podcast to maybe move some of the higher ed and post-secondary programs over to the Department of Labor, move things around a little bit. But instead we get this sort of, these delegation agreements, which rather than like lessening the amount of red tape, they actually increase the amount of
Yeah,
red tape. And uh and it's like that sort of across the board with a set of issues. So I just view 20, it's another year of sort of missed opportunity, and we still have, we've made some progress on chronic absenteeism, but it's still a real issue. Learning loss remains a pretty substantial issue for a lot of kids. We're not doing as well by a lot of kids as we ought to be by any sort of reasonable measure, and yet we've sort of spent another year arguing about what. So I guess missed opportunity, and I just wonder how many of those do you get before there starts to be real consequences from it.
yeah. I just look at 2025 as an inability for us to even talk intelligently about what we actually face. And it just seems to me as though, and I don't want to make broad statements, about politics outside the education lane and all that stuff, but we can see the demographics. We know that one of the United States' strengths is we're younger than other countries, and we've been able to draw people. People want to live here. We have been a magnet for the most amazing minds in the world. And we are making decisions that are exactly opposite of those strategic advantages that we've had, and they also really affect education, because if the country were to take advantage of its unique spot and say we are going to continue to have young people coming into this country, then it makes clear what the challenge is for education in front of us. Let's make sure that every one of these newcomers ends up really well educated so they can take.
Yeah.
And instead it's like we are just not even confronting that reality.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, like I think you can either invest in talent, you can do immigration, or you can do option C, which is my favorite, all of the above. That you have a good immigration policy, and you that attracts talent, and you do a good job with your homegrown talent. But like right now, we're sort of choosing neither, and that is just completely untenable in this world. And I'm not quite sure what exactly resets that.
And if there's anything emblematic of the fact that this has just been one whiff at the plate, but another whiff, or at least another moment at the plate is coming, look at the Supreme Court case around charter schools and religion. We had that whole drama play out. I think what that did is it really laid bare what the level of stakes are for the charter school movement, were that to go in a different direction. And now it looks like there are several cases that are coming up the pike. And we're probably going to have in 26 another court case. Maybe it'll be stutter step and end up being delayed into 27, but it's just a matter of 1 year or so. And so we're going to, like being stuck in some groundhog effect, be talking about the exact same thing. What progress is there in that?
We talked about on the podcast, we talked about that this was probably a non-decision more than it was a decision because the way it came down, 4-4. And if you can get a case where Justice Barrett doesn't have to recuse herself, then it's potentially going to look very different. And there's a couple in this Tennessee case, looks like one to bear the Bears watching. We can put some stuff about that in the show notes. What are you most thankful for outside of obviously family? I know how blessed you are there, but like just in a more general professional and work, what are you most thankful for this year?
I have been struck by the courage that some people have been showing right now. And look, I broken record on this. Brandon's story in Indianapolis is just absolutely.
Brandon runs the Mind Trust.
Brandon Brown, the Charter Folk chat I did with him, and how honestly he spoke about his experience. And then to follow that up with a conversation with Howard Fuller. And Howard, he's just a blessing for our movement in so many different ways. And there's just nobody like him. But also, he wanted to talk about something. That's how the chat got going. And that's where we started. And then I brought up the Brandon thing, and he had watched it. And, about at the 30-minute period, the second half of the discussion with Howard, I mean, that guy's always just viscerally raw and honest and but it got so deep. And the example that he has shown, I think has just been an amazing one. And now it's interesting. There are people across the country that are asking, hey, would Howard be willing to have a Zoom conversation with some charter folk, about the need for courage in our different contexts? So my sense is that it's not just Howard and it's not just Brandon, but there are many people now. I actually feel a sense of greater moxie emerging amongst charter school operators too, willing to take on some of the growth and controversy that's happening. So I'm definitely thankful for that.
That's a good one. I'm thankful, and I'm not just saying this because we forgot to even tell people that you're listening to a podcast. It's called WonkyFolk with Jed Wallace of Charter Folk, and I'm Andy Rotherham with Bellwether. Hopefully you've listened before, and if you haven't, we hope you will, and you'll sign up and become a subscriber and all of those things. And I'm not just saying what I'm about to say because we forgot to say that, but I'm actually really thankful. The feedback we've gotten on the podcast this year has been great. People enjoy it. They seem to listen to it in the car or while they're going for walks or jogging. And we get really interesting feedback, which I appreciate a great deal. And I'm really grateful for that. It makes it better. We've gotten some feedback that's been super useful. And also it's just a great way. It's a blessing is also just you hear so much stuff you may not otherwise hear because people tell you they want to reach out. They want to tell you things. They want to tell you reactions to things that they heard or things that it provoked or made them think about. And having that kind of incoming just makes you so much better at your job. So I'm super thankful for that. I hope we continue to get that in 2026.
Yeah, here. I definitely have appreciated the comments while people are talking. It was great talking with Mackie and Mackie putting things in context and just speaking in appreciative terms about what we're doing. So all that.
Yeah, we got some good guests this year. I mean, this wasn't WonkyFolk. This was Charter Folk. Your thing with Brandon was great. I really enjoyed both listening to and reading that. We've had some great guests. We've got some more coming next year that I think are going to be a lot of fun, and that's been fortunate. We're actually fortunate. We have more than we can accommodate, and that's a nice that's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of places that are fascinating to learn from right now. Likely going to have a focus in Denver and Colorado, and Parker has agreed to join us. And
Parker Baxter, he'll be on next year. Talk Denver's such a seminal place in ed reform, and Parker's done a couple of evaluations, and he's with the University of Colorado, based out of Denver, and he's going to join us.
We've got, and I'm eager to dive into Arizona. There are all sorts of places, so it's gonna be great. Let me ask you though. I mean, I've had several people. Well, first of all, I wrote something about Excel and Ed. I don't know if you read that one or not, Eddie, where I was basically talking about Excel and Ed went to New Orleans, and then they talked about everything except for charter schools. And so I griped a little bit about that. And then I got some feedback from folks, thou shalt not say a negative word about Excel and Ed. And I really wasn't trying to say something negative about that. I was just trying to really underscore that the New Orleans story is a fascinating thing right now. But also, there's a contrast between the feel at the gatherings at Excel and Ed and like the Yaz Prize. I mean, they went to the Yaz Prize and they're like, this feels like charterness, like 25 years ago, the excitement, the optimism, the buzz. I mean, where are you picking up senses of optimism, momentum, energy? Is it in that place only or other places as well?
Well, I was only able to be there for a day. I always enjoy that conference just because you generally it's one of the conferences where you get lots of different kinds of people. They're not sort of all of a type, and and this year was the first post-COVID year. The energy on it really felt like it was back. And so that was good. Where I feel like look, I'm not giving away any state secrets. It's not a great time in a lot of ways. Ed reform is kind of on the ropes and under pressure in different ways from the left and the right. It seems that's like one of the few things they all seem to be able to agree on. But some of the signs, there's like small subsets of people meeting. There's sort of small policy subsets of things starting to happen, small initiatives out around the country. And in my experience, I am sort of a believer in that idea. There was a couple of political scientists that wrote a book about they call it punctuated equilibrium, that like you sort of things change. It doesn't seem like much is changing until it changes. And then it seems like, oh, it was there all along. And I feel like we're not there yet. But you're starting to see some of the groundwork get laid for what will turn into change down the road. And I think that's great. And you've got there's enough people who, at least privately, even if they won't say it publicly, are like, this is not tenable and there's a lot of bullshit. And like, you build from that. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, look, the late 90s, that's what was happening with people were realizing like federal policy, something wasn't working and needed to change. And they started to meet. You had these odd bedfellow coalitions start to come together. And that's also, obviously, that's what like charter schools, kind of the original energy behind them. So these things, so I guess I'm always like optimistic long term, but I just feel like we're starting to see to torture the metaphors, the embers, and at some point they'll blow into something. They'll blow into something bigger.
Well, I'm glad for your optimism. Most of the things, I don't know. I just feel like there's.
I didn't give you a fixed timeline. That wasn't a 2026 prediction. I don't think that's going to happen. 2026 is going to be about a different set of issues, affordability, all that. I think like 2028 was when we start to have a national conversation. And, you got a couple of people in that sort of national kind of mentioning presidential conversation who have interesting things to say about education. Rahm Emanuel has been obviously very like out there on it, but you've got some others who are sort of talking about it in different ways. So I think like this conversation will start to pick up again. And it's not that it's all about presidential politics or all about federal, but that is the way the country tends to have these conversations. And so it'll be a window of opportunity for that.
Yeah, I just feel like, well, in terms of optimism, I love people's optimism that science of reading is the solution to our problems, and Voc Ed, is the solution to our problems, and getting rid of phones is the solution to our problem. And people like go all in on these things, and they're so full of zeal, and it's like they actually believe the entire world is going to change on these things. And to me, they just feel like flavor of the month, just coming back around, and yet because the education reform world doesn't have anything profound or real to like, to center on, we end up like focused on these peripheral.
Can you buy into the idea that those might be, I mean, I don't think any of those are like total solutions, but they might collectively, those might be pieces of a solution that collect, essentially get to 100%, you can get to 100% in different ways. And so some of those might be like 10, 15% kind of solutions that need to get cobbled onto other stuff. Because like I agree, I'm not against that. Like I'm not against any of those things. I have concern about CTE and tracking and making sure that it's actually implemented, that pathways are implemented in a way that takes into account lessons of the past. But like I'm not like against it inherently. Cell phone bans, they're better than the alternative. Even if you don't think they're great. So like but I don't think any of those things are like completely game changers, but they're all like pieces, right?
Yeah, but like the phone stuff, I mean, broadly, societally, our access to technology can have all sorts of effects on people. But I mean, like, you see that thing down in Australia? They're basically saying that 16-year-olds can't access YouTube. I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I mean, it's like, my son, if he didn't have YouTube, he wouldn't have learned how to play basketball. It wasn't like he was going to learn it from his old man. But or what's that mean? That in Australia you can't access Khan Academy? I mean, come on, this is crazy.
Well, no, it's certainly the law. I don't know. I think it's actually, I'm kind of glad they're doing it, in that it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, like we've had other countries early in the AI, periods a couple of years ago trying to like ban that, and people. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I do think we need some experiments. I am very leery to ban modalities of communication, especially right now. I've written about this. Rick Hess and I had a thing about it. We'll put in the show notes. But like, I'm also like, social media it is not good for kids. It's not good for any of us, but it's particularly not good. It's particularly not good for kids. We have to think about things. So I guess I'm more, if the Aussies want to experiment with this, let's see what we can learn from it.
I guess these broad stroke eliminations of technology or options. It's just I remember listening to a podcast with Tyler Cowen, and I think it's the CEO of Anthropic, and Cowen asked him who was the most disadvantaged age group leading into the AI revolution, and the CEO said it's actually the young people whose experience in school is going to be so divorced from what the experience is like in real life, that they're going to go through just cognitive dissonance that's going to be very difficult to maintain. And it seems like what we're really trying to do right now is make schools even more different from the rest of the world that they're about ready to jump into. I think it's crazy. I mean, yes, these technologies compete for kids' attention, and without being left to their own devices, it'll be a problem. But we got to learn how to create human experiences in the real world that compete with these other online experiences, or ultimately the same result will happen in the end.
I have two thoughts. I guess one is, I can't remember a time where tech CEOs haven't said that about school. Like, they always say that. It doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, but they always say it. And I think learning, like, we need to make sure that it's relevant and that it is timely, but also like there's certain aspects of learning that are just like slow and difficult and not sexy. And I think there's always a tendency to try to wish that away. The other piece of that, though, I do agree with very much, and this is what Rick and I kind of talked about, and I wrote about in that Edgewong piece that sort of prompted a lot of that, is simply, we do have to figure out, like, if you don't want kids to be obsessed with like AI companions and this kind of stuff, we got to figure out, what do we have on tap that's compelling? Is that, what are we doing in terms of youth activities, programming, sports, all of it that is like more interesting than your AI companion? And that seems like a pretty substantial challenge. And also, I mean, school, I just said, I'll argue against my own book a little bit. I said, like, school, there's aspects of it that are always going to be a little tedious. That's part of it. And learning is not always easy. And there's a lot of concern about productive struggle and all that. But it doesn't all need to suck as much as it sometimes does. And so I think there's a balance to be struck, and we can't just be like, well, learning's hard, and so that's why the kids are all checking out of school. Like, we got to make sure school's saying they want to check into as well. Well, you can't make it all fun, but
I will. A prediction I would make for 2026 is that bimodality is going to become more prevalent, and we'll start to see it, which is one, absolute embrace of AI and using the stuff, kids using as much as they possibly can, and another, which is keep them in blue books, and handwriting and just so we can get an assessment about whether kids' minds are actually independently developing the capacities that they need to use the AI stuff in the other mode.
Well, I think it's going to be some of both. I'm excited actually about, like, I'll talk about an aspect of AI in a second that I think excites me. I do think you're going to have to come up with some authentic ways to assess kids. You talk to like English teachers and they're like, the writing, you've got to figure out a way to get a baseline on your kids. That's something you hear a lot. And college professors are talking about that as well. And I appreciate that from teaching college. You got to figure out where people are early, so then you can kind of get a sense. So I think it's not surprising to me that some older technologies, including like blue books, are sort of coming back as a way. Something I had an aha. I was at a meeting recently, like a couple of day thing. We were going in on AI, and I've been very skeptical of project-based learning and that kind of assessment for a long time. Not because in theory it makes great sense, but like so many things, like we just talked about a second ago with CTE, so many things that are great in theory. This field is excellent at making sure they don't work in practice by sort of diluting them, taking the rigor out, the things that made them. We see this like again, like Portrait of a Graduate's a great idea, but it's turned into a way to sort of evade accountability. For the adults to evade accountability. And so the thing I was saying with AI and project-based learning that I was encouraged by was simply, we've all seen this done badly. So I think we've probably all been to these things where like community members come in and they evaluate the kids. And I've been meaning to write about this at times, so I'll just like share it here. Like, you get these community members that come in and you have to be a real sociopath, let's be honest, to come in, a bunch of kids you haven't met, spend any time with, you have no relationship with them other than you're some muckety muck from the community, and you're going to come in and tell some kid their work's not good? Of course not. And so you see this like, oh, that's really good and interesting, and that's kind of like what we do in our field, even though everyone's like, oh my God, this is not good work. And AI is not burdened by that, right? And AI may be a way to start to actually have metrics that actually mean something, real direct feedback. And there's some evidence that people like getting feedback from AI, particularly when they know it's anonymized and so forth. It's early, but there's some promising stuff there. And that could be a place where we could then start to assess things differently, allow kids to do some really different kinds of things, which would be great. And so it was a place where I was like, okay, it could help us solve a problem, and I was more encouraged in that way on PBL than I've been in a while. In a way you could potentially start to do it at some kind of scale and have it actually be meaningful.
Yeah, one of the challenges at High Tech High was just making sure that project-based learning stayed rigorous, and that's, I think, one of the great credits that Larry Rosenstock of Tech High deserves. They figured it out. But one of the challenges constantly was having teachers crosswalk their project to the standards, and sometimes there was just resistance. They didn't want to do it. But another part of it was that people just didn't know. They weren't creative enough. Oh yeah, that's great. I can use this to use, and to have AI be there to like help you see like still connection that could be tied to your project-based learning, I think is another possible for AI next year.
Larry's a great example, though, because that's in a way is part of the problem, in the sense that people would go there, they'd see what he was doing, and they'd be like, "Oh, we can do this," and then they would do a weak soup version of it because they're not Larry Rosenstock, and they didn't like have all of that background, that intentionality. And that's why I just find like so many ideas that are actually in many ways really good ideas just get implemented poorly. Everything works somewhere in this sector. They don't travel well, they don't get implemented well. And they end up either getting discredited, or they're things where you're like, that is going to be hard to scale. That's like very person dependent. So that, of course, is an argument for school choice in charter schools, is allow people like Larry to have those sandboxes where they can do cool stuff for kids and where parents can opt into that kind of thing. And, like inexplicably, as we're on the cusp of 2026, a lot of people still don't want that.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about how you think the new standards in Virginia are rolling out. Are they accomplishing what you wanted? I know you've spoken favorably about them. I continue to see basically all other conversations about accountability essentially water things down or move away from objective criteria toward these subjective things that are just going to be garbly gook in the end. Is Virginia actually an example of something better?
It could be. It's too soon to tell. So there's a couple of pieces, and it's a classic ask me in 6 months. There's a couple of pieces. One, Youngkin pushed the ball as far as he could, but it's not all the way there, in the sense the accountability system that he put in place is strong. There's more transparency. He's raising the cut score, so the tests are actually going to be more meaningful than they. So he's put in place what he called an honesty gap agenda, and interestingly, that's the same thing Arnie Duncan called it. So there's this quiet sort of both sides of the aisle, bipartisan. People are like, this is a problem we need to solve. But he didn't have time to put in place a really solid school improvement system yet. There's a lot of work still to be done there. And so that's the first dimension, is there's still just work to be done. And when people would ask me about like, what's the next governor going to do, I would say that's an important question. But an important question is also, what does the governor after that do? Because like Virginia's like kind of been a laggard for a little while now in ed reform, and you don't fix that overnight. That takes a couple of, it took us a few cycles to get into this hole. It takes a few cycles to get out of them. And so there's still work to be done. That's the first variable. The second is it's a partisan time, and there's just a lot of strong feelings. And will people be able to separate? I mean, if you ask me, like two of the things I think that Youngkin did that are important and I hope are built on, one is the education pieces. He opened, these lab schools across the state, the accountability stuff we just talked about, and the other is on mental health, both for young people and more generally. He had a really good mental health initiative, and you don't want to see that stuff. There's plenty of room to do politics and all that. You don't want to see stuff like that fall prey to just partisan back and forth. But will it? You get, when you add up the people who don't like accountability because the adult constituent groups don't like accountability, and like everywhere else, we have a lot of people who even if they don't realize it, are acting to make sure the schools operate for the benefit of the adults more than the kids. So you've got all that going on, and then you got people ideologically genuinely just don't like this stuff. And then you got all the partisan people who are like, well, I don't care if I like it or not. If the other guy did it, I got to like undo that. That's a lot. You add that up, that's an awful lot of people. So we'll see. I think the interesting thing is for Abigail Spanberger who's the incoming governor who will be sworn in next month. She's going to be under a lot of pressure in the state on a whole bunch of issues. And she'll have to figure out where does she pick her spots. And there's going to be a lot, she's right to work. She's got like a bunch of positions. And so will she be able to take a stand on education or not, remains to be seen. But interestingly, if she has national ambitions, which everyone does, you know this, every governor looks in the mirror and sees a president staring back at them. So if she has those ambitions, her national ambitions and being good on ed reform actually line up pretty well. She doesn't want to. It'll be hard in 2028, given like what it's shaping up like. If you were the person who lowered standards, you reversed efforts to like raise the rigor of the test, you closed public schools of choice. That's not a good look. And so she'll have to figure that out. But her national ambitions, like she doesn't do those things, and she sort of builds on it. I mean, that's what George Bush did. A lot of the education stuff, I don't take anything away from Bush. He was a very good education governor. But a lot of that stuff was in place when he got there, right? And he was able to sort of ride that. She has a similar opportunity. We'll see if she can take it, but it's extremely teed up for her.
Yeah. Well,
but tell me what else. Like, you're like, I'm close to. I hear lots of stuff. Like, what are you hearing? Like, as you travel around, what are you hearing? And obviously, Virginia continues to be a laggard state on charters.
yeah. No, I hear just generally Virginia being sort of counterfactual. Okay, something new on accountability was accomplished. I saw an article that came out. I think that there was a new report on how schools were doing under it for the first time. I just and I think the way that you diagnose the problem with the adult interests and all that stuff really affecting things, and there being those that are ideological. Then there's the partisanship. All that I agree with, but I also feel like they're the ed reformers ourselves, and we're just co-opted. We're just bought in. We're like, okay, tests are dead, and let's start pretending that this other Garbley Gook is actually valuable way to measure it. And I'm just very, very skeptical. And I think what happens again and again, we could have had this going back to 1990 or so. We could have individual test results down to the student, so we can have growth and we can see whether or not schools are improving the rate at which kids achieve basic literacy and basic numeracy. This is very simple. It's very simple. And also, it's not very time consuming. I mean, these NWA map stuff. I mean, we can know kids' basic reading and basic math abilities in the lower grades, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. By middle school and high school, okay, maybe it's 45 or 50 minutes, but it's nothing in terms of a time commitment. And because we won't stay focused on that basic literacy, basic numeracy, a progress, we're now just talking about distracting things, and I don't see how our world is really helping right now. We're just going along.
Well, I think there's that old quote: "Argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they'll be yours." Like, I think the ed reform community spends too much time arguing for its own limitations. Like, we should be saying tests need to be a lot better. They can be a lot better than they are. There's a bunch of people who run around and have these ideas on tests that are just technically not feasible with any kind of large scale assessment. But there's serious people like my colleague Michelle Croft at Bellwether, who they're serious. They appreciate the technical feasibility, but also like the potential. She's a psychometrician, as I said, by training. But instead, we argue is it no tests, or we allow the debate, we allow the limits of the debate to be set by others. And I just think that's a place this movement should stake out its own. It should get back to staking out its own sort of North Stars and sailing towards them, rather than allowing other people to find it. If the debate becomes tests or no tests, the existing tests today versus no tests, that's not. Why allow the debate to be defined that way? Define it as, here's what we can actually do. Here's what kids deserve. Here's what parents should expect. And I feel like you can play that out across just a range of things, but we end up setting a lot of our own limitations based on what people think is feasible or popular or whatever else.
Yeah, and I just think we're going in exactly the opposite direction of having access to basic literacy and basic numeracy. And I think what we're going to have to do is just let several more years of this incoherence just be there until people see it's a freaking problem, and then they're going to turn around and finally do it. But in terms of comparison against what the Chinese are doing, we will have lost a decade. And in this world where things are changing this rapidly, a lost decade to China, I don't think that's a very smart thing for us to be doing as a country.
Well, it's a missed opportunity. There's just, as we were talking earlier, just missed opportunities. And yeah, I mean, the Chinese are very serious on the competitive front. They're approaching it differently. than we do, and there's some different dimensions there. But yeah, they obviously they mean business. And yeah, you talk to some people, and they will tell you they are less worried about the military side of this and more that they feel like the Chinese are very patient and they're going to try to just continue to apply pressure, economically, and in education's a piece of that, rather than like people were more concerned about what could it mean in terms of use of force and some kind of conflict between our countries. Who knows? But yeah, so I mean, I think part of the problem, though, something I know you wanted to talk about, which is the dissonance between sort of what people say privately and what they say publicly seems like a real problem.
Yeah, let me ask you, what makes you most uncomfortable that you're writing about? I mean, we all know things that we're bumping up against. I was sharing about Excel and Ed. I mean, when I push on private school choice and not keeping our thumb on the scale for low income students, universal, everybody gets the same amount of money. You can screen out kids by selective admission. I mean, I know it pisses off, our private school friends. And I mean, I'm not saying we should throw ourselves on the tracks and all that kind of stuff, but I definitely feel it as I'm writing it. I definitely feel it as I'm saying it as well. I have some other ones I could certainly, cop to myself, but what makes you squirm? What makes you squirm when you're writing about some of these?
That's such a good question. I want to hear more about this from you because it's the things that make me squirm are two different things. One is not having the time. So I have like a ton of things that I've sort of gathered a whole bunch of string on, or they're half written, or I have like detailed notes and so forth. But I have it. So I'm like, I don't have the time to get my own thinking where I want it to be on that. And then the other one is like accuracy, which is tied to the first one. Like I have a low error rate. That's something I like. And so I like, that's why I don't like just sling takes around just like all the time. It takes time. And so those are those are the things that I sweat more. It's those things. I don't mind taking on controversial topics. In fact, I think we don't talk about them enough. And I'm willing to sort of, you get pushback, but you have to be, first of all, being like, you get something wrong, you have a take that's wrong. That's not the end of the world. You're going to be wrong a bunch of the time. When I say accuracy, it's like, I want to make sure I have like basic facts right, so forth. The contours of something correct. And you just have to be confident that you're going to be, you're going to be right more than you're wrong, or things are going to move in the direction you think they're going to move in. And I don't mind like an obvious one would be the last few years, it's been like really toxic on all these issues affecting transgender kids. And I sort of staked out a position that sort of pleased no one, which was like dignity, respect, treat, obviously non-discrimination, and people need to stop being assholes to these kids. But like sports, that was a problem and it needed to be addressed. And like I watched the other day, the litigator from the ACLU, Chase Strangio, I think I'm pronouncing the last name right, Strangio, they've litigated a bunch of these cases and so forth. The head person at the ACLU doing this, and they were on Ross Dohat's, I think I'm saying his name right, Dohat, his podcast at the Times, and they were saying, oh yeah, the sports thing, we probably do need some restrictions. And this is a person who a couple of years ago was calling everybody a transphobe who wasn't for 100% full. People could play in any sport however they identified. And like, I just feel like you have to like, and I can like save all the little nasty grams, and I made sure I made a note of all the people who said crazy shit to me about that. But like, you just have to have the confidence that, okay, this will, like, the sports thing does seem like something's there. And so that didn't trouble me as like a controversial issue. It was more, the stress point was I wanted to make sure I was writing with care and was getting it right, because you're talking about people's lives. That was much more the stress point for me than like that it's controversial. Is like, I want to make sure I'm like doing the best I can on a complicated question. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people count on coming from Andy Rotherham, right? That's you.
I don't know what they count on.
Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, I speak glowingly about you in all sorts of different places. And
I know you're great. You're the one. You're the one. That's why we have the podcast.
But I just feel like there are all sorts of things now that um, they just they don't make any sense. They just don't make any sense. And this crap about we're not going to understand what's going on with basic literacy and basic numeracy,
Right.
it's just nuts. And to not be able to like speak forcefully on that. The stuff around like limiting what teachers can teach in history, and so all this kind of just try to of course, some woke stuff went too far, and the left has their ideology they're trying to impose on all these schools. Well, the right's doing it, with even greater vigor right now, and virtually no one says anything about it. No one, and and I think
I don't.
it's
No one says. I just feel like it's the opposite. Like this gender stuff that's now happening in some of the colleges in Texas, it's the inverse of the stuff that was happening a few years ago where people were losing their jobs because people on the left were freaking out. Now people on the right are freaking out and people are losing their jobs over that. And like, I don't think it's that no one is saying anything. It's that only each time, only half the people say something. And like it's either a problem or it's not. And if you think it's not a problem, then you shouldn't think it's a problem when either it's happening on either side. If you think it is a problem, I happen to think it's a problem, which won't surprise you. Then you should be like, it's it's not good when people are losing their jobs for stupid reasons in 2020 and 2021. It's not good when they're losing their jobs in Texas in 2025. We should like be better.
yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
we're living these like parallel worlds,
Yeah, and it's whenever we see some regulation that we don't agree with, we go after it and we say we don't like it because of whatever the policy matter is, and we'll say, and by the way, our schools are so overregulated that the last thing we need is additional
Right?
regulation. Well, and then the other side of the political spectrum will do the exact opposite, in terms of whatever the social issue is, but they'll also make the argument that our schools are too overregulated. It's just, and no one can sit there and say stop regulating our damn schools. You're killing them. Right? And I also I feel like I've been doing some stuff with like some charter advocates, part of stuff around about Brandon and whatever. Charter school people, we get timid when things get controversial, right? It's shy away. Don't say that thing. Don't say that. Don't make that criticism of the school district. And what I say to everybody, having been through it many times at CCSA, is if you want to do something bold, don't try and do something bold in the middle of controversy. You're dead if you've waited until that moment. Have a discussion at some moment proactively. What are our values? What are we trying to get done? And what are we in the abstract willing to deal with, from a controversy standpoint?
Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
they make the decision there and then ride it out when you've made your choice through the actual controversy, right? But because we're not proactively articulating these things, Andy, we just get battered around in the wind.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. What do you think causes, like, I've been struck, like, there's this one dimension and like people write about, luxury beliefs, which is sort of another word for like virtue signaling or whatever. But the other problem is like revealed preferences. These people who they say one thing and then they do another. So you've got all these people who are like not wanting to be serious about reading, but they're making sure their own kids. These are generally people who are in positions of power. They're making sure their own kids can read. What we're talking about is making sure that poor kids can read so they have a shot
Yep.
at the American dream too. But these people who are like, oh, we should de-emphasize these things, they're not de-emphasizing them for their own kids, right? And you see this, whether it's like, like the teachers union leader in Chicago, who turned out like her kids were in private schools after she was like rallying against that and all this stuff. Like she was making sure her own kids were getting what they needed. You see it on school choice, people who are like, I'm against school choice, I'm against privatization, but they made sure they're either in a public private, so they can afford a place that gets them zoned into just the right schools, or they go private.
Yeah.
Like it's this, I think it's like this revealed preference. I think one of the things we don't talk about is enough of that, because it's part and parcel of just running schools that basically exist for the convenience of the adults and, to work for adult interests. And we should be, maybe that's a place we should be having more hard conversations is, if you want to talk about structural inequality, it's things like, property tax based schools and essentially residentially based school choice?
Well, I think it's a function of the fact that we suffer from having no visions and no beliefs. And, Rod Page passed away last week. And I had a chance to get to know Don McAdams pretty well and did an interview with him. It was so interesting. It's the morsels of just Rod Page is a fascinating figure. He's a fascinating figure, right? But the thing that McAdams always goes back to is, Rod started on the board of the school district, right? And then
Right.
one of the first tasks that he had was to lead a task force that would come up with a declaration of visions and beliefs. And what they wrote blew a lot of people away, especially by a 1990 construct. And McAdams was like, people just don't understand how that document was his anchor for basically the rest of his professional life, right? He did it. He wrote it, and I just feel like we can talk about Rod Page. I'd love to, see what your theories are or what your reactions are to his passing away, what people have been saying about him generally. But in terms of a shining example of a person that had that anchor, the language that McAdams used was Rod Page is a Nerf ball with a core of steel, flexible on all of the surface issues, could take a punch, but kept spiraling toward, his goal. But then when you got to a core of things, and he always talked about the core of things was his vision and his beliefs. I'm sorry. Most of the people that are out there throwing out their ideas right now, I don't think they've got a vision and beliefs. Go and write your damn declaration statement. Come back and share it with us. And then let's start having the next conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it shortly. I mean, Rod was, I didn't know him super well, but I'm close to a lot of people who did know him very well. I was always impressed. His life story,
Yeah.
incredibly impressive, and so forth. And as a result of that, I think what was impressive about him professionally is he was kids first. He did not suffer from the client confusion of who is it, the adult interests or people talking themselves into like doing the bidding of the adult interests while like rationalizing it some way. He labored under none of that. He was kids first. That the schools exist to serve the kids, even when that's inconvenient or difficult or whatever else. And because of that, he took a chance on some stuff, including, two young educators in Houston, who ultimately became KIP.
Yep.
Mike Feinberg and Doug Levin. And like, I don't know. That's impressive, and that's a legacy right there. I think that's that's the thing that stood out about him the most. And when you saw sort of the private reactions, people talking and emails going around and so forth, that was the thing. Like, it was his character, the kind of person he was what people were talking about much more than any like roles he held or any of the rest of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of his personal reputation gets intertwined with NCLB and what's the latest thing that we think about NCLB and whatever. Who can't identify things that were a problem in NCLB, but to attach that to Rod Page's identity, like that's the deepest way to understand this guy. I think that's a great disservice.
I agree, and I think one of the things that gets lost is that like the convenient like thing you hear is people like, oh, Texas, Houston, it was all cheating. And there was some cheating that went on. Cheating goes on in lots of places. But you had a lot of the achievement gains and so forth confirmed by independent.
Yeah.
NAEP was going on. People were not cheating on the NAEP, right? And that's the same thing was happening in some other states. And people were always like, oh, we're now going through that same thing again, which is with Mississippi, people are like, oh, it can't possibly be real. And again, like you're looking at the results in the NAEP, you're like, something's happening here. This is not just like tests. And what is fascinating to me, has been fascinating for a long time, is like the number of people who, when something works, are like ready to rush out and debunk it and make sure it can't possibly work. And Rod Page just had high expectations for kids. He believed kids could do more than what we expect. We should have higher expectations for everybody. and so forth. And he was never like, as soon as something was working, like peering around the corner because it couldn't possibly be real or right. And we need more of that. We need people. We don't need credulous people, but we need people who are fundamentally sort of optimistic and believers. And like the Mississippi reaction again, it's like it's at one level it's sort of comical, and watching sort of journalists bat around people who purport to be education researchers is not like a great look for the sector. I don't know if you've been following Kelsey Piper's like fighting all comers, and it's like, no, I don't mean take anything away from her. She's a great reporter, but she's a journalist. She's not she's not an ed analyst per se. It's not a great look for the field. But like the people are just like rushing out because they want to like debunk. It can't because it threatens if it's possibly real, and it's like, maybe that's a wish for 20. In addition to like more hard conversations, just more empiricism. Like we're always gonna be surprised. That's what kind of makes it interesting. And there's just like a lack of willingness just to learn about this stuff, and see what works, what doesn't work. So I've always admired about you is like you're willing to like, you'll look at the evidence and so forth and try to figure out, and you don't necessarily like sugarcoat it.
Well, I have a theory. And also, like, people on Bellwether can say, yeah, Jed's pilled. Well,
You're charter pilled.
But look, I got a theory, and people know what I think, and I can keep testing it. And I think that we have public education that's been sadly unpublic, and what we want is greatly more public education. And I can talk about what that is, and I can talk about what the charter school role is toward that. And I think we have to have the courage to say it over and over and over and over again. And I don't think we have it yet, but we're getting there. But really, Andy, I don't know that many other people in the landscape where I would say, I'm not trying to cast praise on me. But it's like, but like, who has it? Who has a theory about how this is supposed to get better? And like, as we have these breakthroughs, I mean, I want to say to our private school, friends, okay, as this thing goes universal, and as everybody's got $8,000 a kid, tell me how it plays out. Tell me how it plays out. And I don't think any of them have it, even if they're wrong in describing it, because of course you're going to be wrong. You're never going to be able to read the future, but at least you have to have a theory. And I don't know what anybody's theory is in public education these days.
I'll steelman their theory, which I think is we need something new. It's going to be messy to get there, but we need to create disruption to create that new thing. I think the folks who are not like it's ideologically driven around this stuff, I think that is I can steelman their argument. That is, I think, what they I think they would say. I think they would agree. They would say, I don't think we know exactly what's going to happen. We can't all that, but like this is a necessary predicate to getting there. And what's happening now doesn't work. So I think that I can see what they're driving at. Is it like, I think I think the, jury is very much out and all of that, but I can at least steelman their argument. I think the bigger question is like the public education folks, they have nothing on offer. Right. And in politics, you can't beat something with nothing. And they are trying to do that. And this is starting to show up in this conversation of will the Democrats ever get their act together on education? Like what is the counter? What's the strong pro public ed reform kind of agenda? Because the status quo, I mean, the bottom's not going to like fall out tomorrow, but you can see the attrition. All the trends are bad. And public education has to like engage with that. And there's to my way of thinking, there's insufficient energy around that. And the irony, of course, is a lot of reformers are very pro public ed. So when they're starting to meet, trying to figure out what's going on, they're actually trying to solve that problem, all the while getting attacked by the establishment, as being, anti public ed and everything else. And they're at least trying to get closer to like what's some kind of a vision that includes a robust public sector.
But it's all just built on pretense, just like CPS, Chicago Public. Well, you could choose it. You can choose whatever major city you want to right now. I mean, the amazing thing is that CTU is now basically taking the entire city of Chicago. I don't know if you saw the Washington Post editorial today about Brandon Johnson, what's going on there. I mean, really, if you believe in the science of reading, or if you believe in whatever other reform, do you really think that CPS in its current state, with its current economics, with its current governance, with its current toxic culture and other problems, under enrollment, and like sending money to schools that parents don't want to send their kids to? I mean, you really think science of reading is going to solve that problem? That is not it. And
but it's a predicate. I mean, look, if the Chicago public schools could get serious about teaching reading, that would be a game changer for a lot of kids. I think one of the things we don't talk honestly about is just how abysmal the achievement is in a lot of these places. I mean, we talked about Virginia earlier. We just came through this debate about what's going on, and are most of the schools are actually great, whatever. Like you look at our NAEP data disaggregated by race and income, it's absolutely appalling. And like, we don't talk about that. And Chicago, I mean, like this data is it is stunning. And I think one of the things people shy away from is honest conversations about like what that means and what does it actually mean for individuals in terms of what kind of opportunities they're going to be able to access, and like how much choice and agency they're going to have in their own lives. And so that's a place like also we ought to just have some real conversations around. And I think what you do when you do that is you flush out people on the right and the left who, for different reasons, don't believe you're going to get very good results. And I think we should flush that into the open and have that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously I disagree like strenuously with that. And I think we can do much better, but let's at least have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had your again. I mean, is it a trend over our however many years of doing this, 3-4 years, that you've now become more optimistic than me?
Well, you have to be. I mean, look, I'm short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic, right? Like you have to, and if I was, I'd go do something else. Like and I do think like, this stuff ebbs and flows in terms of the public policy and politics side of it. You can't get too wrapped up with that. It's going to come and go. And I mean, look at the progress we've seen. We've talked about it. Like, this isn't a great time, but we've seen a lot of progress over the years. I think one of the things that was most inspiring to me about sort of the ethos that broke out post 2020 is how hard it was for people to even talk about progress. And you can argue we have real problems, and we do, but also we've seen progress to get people bought into that. And it became quickly framed that if you were talking about progress at all, it meant you were somehow blind to the problems, which is just a terrible way to do politics. And it's also just, again, empirically wrong.
Yeah. Well, I love our time together, and learn from you each time we talk, and look forward to 2026. I think we're going
to have a big thing planned for 2026. We won't spoil it here. We'll roll it out to listeners later in 2026 when it happens, but it's going to be great. And I enjoyed it as well. And again, we're super grateful to everybody who listens. You can, get this. Make sure you're signed up for Jed's newsletter. Make sure you're signed up. You're reading Edgewonk, and you can subscribe to the podcast in various ways. And those are all good ways to find out about it.
Yeah, people are telling me that the likes actually matter a great deal. So if people just click on that dumb thumb sign, I guess it actually helps with the algorithms a lot. So
I'm terrible about doing all that. Apparently it does matter, and we're appreciative. So this was sort of a holiday. Holiday in the year. We'll do predictions.
I just played predictions.
We'll do predictions here. It was a bit of a year wrap up on the Mulligan year. We didn't wasting another one of our Mulligans. We will we'll do predictions in early 2026. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Well, listen, have great holidays, and thank you again for a great 2025, and look forward to continuing to do it next year.
You as well, Jim, as well.
Okay, see you now.
Thanks.